Halls Falls, Tasmania. I saw some good locations near Halls Falls and Lenners Ridge Road where the forest opens up into grassland. We might be able to catch a tiger crossing from one area to another over the night or early morning. That perspective would give us a better image than we would get in the darker forest cover. They also must cross a river to go back and forth, Travis said, and we all agreed that made sense. The areas he was talking about were roughly halfway back to our camp, so they would be even easier to retrieve. We sat around the fire eating our evening meal when Krista announced. Travis went back to Halls Falls on Groom River near the trailhead and picked up the 2 cameras he set out. You're not going to believe what he got. Excited, we all gathered around the laptop and waited while he set up the video. I've seen this twice only because I couldn't believe it when I looked at it in the truck the first time. One camera points east and the other points west, and they're hanging from the bottom of a bridge. The first video was an infrared video looking downriver from about 5 meters above. The night was clear, and the camera resolution was nice, but it was still a little dark at the further range. There was some humming and hawing, but Travis encouraged us, just wait. The animal was coming closer to the camera and a couple other shapes appeared behind it. When the animal was about 5 meters away, it turned sideways, and the stripes were obvious, as was the elongated snout and the ridged kangaroo-like tail. A cheer went up that could probably be heard across half of Tasmania. That's it, Travis. Krista shouted, and everyone began slapping each other on the back. Uncle Artis said less than most. He was obviously pleased with the video, but I think he realized it was just another piece of evidence that people were going to debate. In reality, the only thing that changed was that we were now confirmed believers because we believe what we saw was a tiger family. We could even go back and get some prints, but again it would just be debated for the next 5 years, or at least until this particular Tasmanian tiger's grandpups grow up and move away with no forwarding address. If we're going to revive the Tasmanian tiger from a running start, then we need a sample of its DNA. That would give us the full genome rather than a sequenced genome from fragmented historical data. If the university had such a sample, would it impact their decision on whether or not to clone the thylacine? That's precisely the question we don't want to take 5 years to debate, because we know what our answer is now. Let's do it, and everyone again gave a rousing cheer, and especially Uncle Artis this time. We should keep this video in our own archives for the time being. More importantly, we know the exact spot to leave them alone for now. Uncle Artis suggested. Magda asked, with a blood sample we could clone babies in a surrogate mother, right? To which I nodded in the affirmative. She and Krista let out a joint coordinated shout that woke every thylacine in the neighborhood. Everything in this forest knew we were there that night. We enjoyed a sing-along campfire, and Uncle Artis kept us locked and loaded with cold brews as we celebrated the night away. To be so lucky as to find a thylacine on our first visit to Tasmania was too much of a coincidence to me. Magda told me she felt the same thing and said we must look at the paintings Andrew gave us. Albert Namajira was an Aboriginal artist from the MacDonnell Ranges in Central Australia. He gave Magda 2 paintings from the same dream, but they were from different parts of the dream. Whether or not they're connected or how they're connected, he couldn't say. This image showed the same people on a journey, but this time they were surrounded by tigers and extremely bad weather was shown moving toward them. Who, or what, is manipulating our destiny? Magda asked me, and I felt my hand slip to my necklace. The discussions were all about tigers and devils that night. I knew we were jumping the gun somewhat, but ultimately, they wouldn't be disappointed. As Errol often says, failure is not an option, and then he does it. Later that year, Uncle Artis acquired the Halls Falls property that we wanted and hired Travis and Tamor to build some discreet camp buildings and a kennel. The idea was to keep the Anchor Road face looking like a residence rather than anything more. The boys would be mapping the place extensively with cameras to try and become familiar with the movements of the thylacines we know pass through the property. We've seen them, now we need to get a sample from them. They've been emailing Cheesy constantly about their camera and computer setups. Even Magda got into one conversation. We needed more than a picture, a hair sample would be great. We drove along the Groom River, which would lead us to our access to the Halls Falls area on our first visit. Our new property was off Anchor Road, but included the Halls Falls general area. We pulled into the camp where directly ahead of us was what appeared to be someone's residence. As we continued around to the back of the building where another road led to a much more extensive complex of buildings out of sight from the road, we realized it was an illusion. These buildings included a laboratory, a workshop, and several kennels. Uncle Artis had done an excellent job in making it appear nondescript from the road. Halls Falls, on the Groom River, drops from a 19th century weir located upstream from the waterfall. The weir was created by Chinese miners working the region's mineral veins for tin. Back in the day, tin was required for household utensils, including pots, pans, candle holders, oil lamps, and lanterns. Lots of rock pools add valuable terrain that the thylacine would love for hunting their prey. Huge stumps remained as a reminder of the tall trees that were felled over a century ago by the early settlers wanting to sail away from here. I mentioned to the boys that snakes seemed to like the same habitat and that seemed to entertain them. Easily followed trails traversed the area, but Tamor and Travis were careful to avoid any tourist areas that might attract visitors at certain times of the year. Everyone put on their snake protectors in the morning, but we stayed on the path most of the time. Tamor and Travis did a lot of what they called bush bashing, where they forced their way through some of the densest terrain on the planet. That may have been the shortest route between two places, but there are not many people who would follow them through the myrtle. To distract visitors, they even reconstructed some of the existing paths to veer away from areas of interest to them. Late one night, we sat in the cabin watching the monitors and discussed the road in front of us from DNA sample to cloned animals set to be released into the wild. One morning while we were at Windhaven, Errol, Cheesy and I received a text from Uncle Artis. We got one. In all caps. My first instinct was to email Magda to let her know a wish of hers just came true. She replied, I know. The new footage they had of the tigers was astounding. Tamor had just put out some fresh paddymmelon meat that he found as roadkill, and you could see him walking away in the first video. He didn't even turn around because the tiger was so quiet and stealthy. I had no idea that little blighter was scopping me. Tamor exclaimed. Fresh DNA will change the game.